What are my takeaways? Let's get into that. What are the takeaways from this ball game? What are the overarching themes? Look, we know Ryan Williams is 17 years old. They said enough in the broadcast. They said enough in leading up to the game. I was a part of an article for CBS Sports and 24/7 Today talking about Ryan Williams. And yes, we all know he's 17 years old, reclassified. It's been discussed. It's been ad nauseum talked about. So we know that. But here's kind of my big takeaway, and it's probably something that we knew, but I don't know if it's necessarily something that we remembered heading into this game. Jalen Milroe and this Alabama offense is nearly unguardable. Now, Georgia made adjustments in that second half, but Jalen Milroe and this Alabama offense, when they're clicking, I don't know if there's a defense in the country that can stop them. Will, I really wanted to be on the show because I wanted him to talk about this. There's questions still remains that Jalen Milroe in this Alabama offense, and Jalen Milroe in specifically, we know Will's an Auburn fan, but that Jalen Milroe specifically is not necessarily a quarterback in the terms of he's not an elite passer. But what Jalen Milroe does do is improvise, create, and make plays. And for a 20 to 25 minutes into that ball game, nobody could stop them. And this Alabama offense was the most dominant unit on the field. And you're talking about a Alabama defense that made a Georgia offense that's pretty good look pedestrian. So one of my biggest takeaways is it doesn't matter what you think about when you talk about Jalen Milroe as a quarterback. He's one of the best playmakers in college football. He's one of the best playmakers in this sport. Regardless of what you think about his ability to layer passes, his ability to throw the ball, his ability to accurately hit the intermediate to short routes, whatever you want to talk about it, he is a playmaker. He is someone that is a headache for opposing coordinators and defensive coaches to game plan and scheme against. And for 20 to 25 minutes on Saturday, Georgia looked like an FCS defense. So, and Will says this, and Will puts a comment in here. He said it's hard to keep saying that Milroe isn't good when he keeps making all these plays and winning games because a ton of big time recruits were there. Juju Lewis wanted to keep on an eye on for Bama. To Will's point, we can sit here and talk about, well, he's not a polished quarterback. He doesn't have a great whatever you're talking. He's winning ball games, and he is by far the best playmaker on the field when he steps on the field. That's just what he is, and you can have a lot of conversations. Look, Alabama has to figure out what happened in the second half. I will say this: there's probably maybe 2 to 3 other teams that could do what Georgia did in the second half, make adjustments, and come back in that ball game. I think Texas is one. Ohio State might be one. The jury's still out on that. Outside of those, it's really a crapshoot of where you could go with some other teams. Maybe Tennessee could. So credit to Georgia. They came back in this ball game. They fought. That's what championship caliber teams are able to do. Not a lot of teams could do that. But for me, the storyline is coming out is that when you have a quarterback like Jalen Milroe, a player in that position, your goal is to surround him with so much talent that any deficiency or shortcoming that he might have is completely masked by his ability to play within your system. And he has such great weapons around him that none of it matters. And that's where Alabama is. I mean, the offensive firepower that this team has is ridiculous. The offensive firepower they have around him, not even including number 4, is wild. Ryan Williams, unbelievable football player. But this is incredible when we talk about what he's been able to do. And look, I have been, critical of Milroe in the terms of, thinking, hey, he's a great athlete. He can make plays. But what is he as a quarterback? New coordinator, new coaching staff, new culture. And it's still the same, but different. He went out there and dominated. He won football games. And they looked like the best team in college football for 25 to 30 minutes. Now, obviously, Jalen Milroe, that's the big topic. Also want to kind of flow into this. Bama's still Bama. If you were expecting a massive drop-off, first off, I don't know what you were smoking. And second, a massive drop-off of Bama wouldn't really happen until maybe year 3 of Kalen DeBoer, in my opinion. Kalen DeBoer is a winner. We talked about that back in January, what he could bring to the table when this hire was made. What would this look like? Uh, for me, Kalen DeBoer is a winner. And right now, he's winning with elite players. They're not all of his guys necessarily, but he's winning with elite players. We'll see what happens when it comes to his recruiting, which they still do very well in. When it comes to players that he has to go out and get himself and handpick, and his staff has to evaluate, not just inheriting a great roster. That's the difference right now between a Ryan Day and a Kirby Smart, I would say. So Bama's still Bama. Now let's talk real quick about Georgia because we want to talk about that as well. Carson Beck struggles and then helps the comeback attempt. This is a guy who had not thrown more than 2 interceptions in 17 games that he started this year. Look, the lights were bright. Gavin says the lights were too bright for a check down Beck. I think Carson Beck's still one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the country. This is a guy who, in terms of talent wise, for one game against probably a top 5 defense in the country, he didn't play well. If that's the measure and we're saying that's not good and you're trash or you're a fraud, then everyone is bad and no one is good. And because nobody's succeeding in that situation outside of a Milroe, outside of some otherworldly talent. So we'll see. I mean, Georgia, it was a nightmare situation, a nightmare scenario for the first 15 to 20 minutes of that game, heading to the halftime, obviously with the score being what it was, could not have gone worse. Could not have gone worse. The ability to bounce back cannot be manipulated. It cannot be overstated. That's a big thing for them. Obviously, the 12-team playoff plays a role into that. And I think it also looked good better from an optics standpoint. Georgia's still a very good football team. They've got to figure some things out because if that happens again, if it happens on the road at Texas, on the road at Ole Miss, at home against Tennessee, you may not be able to climb out of that hole and make it close because regardless of whether you like it or not, a lot of this is about making it close. Georgia making that game close looks better when the playoff committee looks at that resume. They will remember what obviously happened in the first half, but they'll also remember Georgia coming back in the football game. So I don't know. Also, Georgia's defense made some great adjustments. Kirby Smart talked about this post game. Wasn't as aggressive in the second half. That probably helped. A lot of people talk about Milroe. You've got to get in his face. Well, he seems to be a guy that can not just beat a 3-man pass rush, but he can also create out of chaos. And that's something he did a lot of against Georgia. The big play that stands out to me was Christian Miller, the defensive tackle, defensive lineman for Georgia, went high on a sack attempt, missed it, and Milroe obviously makes a play out of it. He creates out of chaos. I think that's something that Jalen Milroe does so well. And then the question has to be asked, obviously, with this too, are these the best 2 teams? I'm hesitant to make any kind of claim of that heading into week 6. These are 2 really good football teams. This was if you're a casual college football observer with no dog in the fight, no pun intended, then this was a great football game. This is an all-time classic in terms of what you wanted to see. When you want to see the best of the best, go against the best of the best. And I will say this, look, I cover LSU. I've been at Auburn. I've been in Sanford Stadium. I've been at Williams-Brice. I've been in Neyland. When you talk about some of the best environments, Alabama's an underrated one. They may not show up for the Western Kentuckys of the world, but when it's prime time in Bryant-Denny Stadium, that place is as hard as any place in the country to go win a football game. It is. You have to experience it to understand it. So were these the 2 best teams? I'm hesitant to put anything on that right now. What I will tell you is that that's 2 playoff teams, and that's probably round 1, maybe round 2. I won't say round 3 quite yet. But those are 2 good football teams. I'm not going to tell you it's the best 2 teams in the country because I think Texas is legitimate and I think Tennessee's a pretty good football team. I'm not ready to crown anybody after a big win because, like I've preached on this show and our other shows as well, you cannot get too emotionally high or too emotionally low based off of 1 week. The team we're going to be talking about next is a perfect example of that. But what you can do is say, okay, here's a data point. Here's a data point. When we group those together, and we're into week 6 of college football, you can start to kind of use some of those data points to form an opinion on what this team might be. But for a Saturday in September, I think it would be crazy to put labels on these 2 teams right now. Crazy, because there's still a lot of football left to be played, especially for Georgia in the SEC slate. So that's Georgia, Alabama. Massive game, a fun watch. Obviously, Ralph shout out to Ralph. He's, I think, still working tonight, and he came to Baton Rouge. We left the LSU game, which was a bloodbath, at halftime to kind of take in the final moments of that Georgia Alabama game.